Hello, and thank you very much for joining us here today. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Rachel Lewis, who's an occupational psychologist and director of Affinity Health at Work. Today we are going to look at a really pressing topic that is as important as the physical health of COVID-19, and that's issues around mental health. It is particularly pertinent today because WHO have just declared COVID-19 a pandemic. But more importantly, as we're a global community, we are looking at people who are travelling or not travelling, and we are starting to see a lot of issues around questions about mental health and what can we do on an organisational and an individual level to protect ourselves from its effects. So if I just firstly kick off, because we're talking about travel, but remember now this isn't just about international travel, this is also about travel in your community or maybe to work. You need to understand what the risk is of the place that you're going to compared to the risk of the place that you're currently in. So don't go blindly travelling around, but also don't limit yourself if actually the risk is exactly the same. So for instance, right now in England, it's probably pretty similar community to community, and therefore your risk of travel outside of anybody you might meet is probably standard. Rachel, what would be your sort of first tip?
I suppose the first tip is to accept your worries. I think that having an emotional reaction at this moment is, whether that's going to be fear or whether that's anger or frustration, is completely normal and expected. And actually, what it is a sign that all our body's protective mechanisms have kicked in. So actually, having that emotional reaction, so having a level of anxiety is actually going to be good for us, because what it means is that we're more likely to then go on and try and attempt to protect ourselves. So whatever you do, don't try and think to yourself, I mustn't be worried, because actually, firstly, worry is quite good for us in this situation, and secondly, research tends to show if we try and stop worrying, we actually worry more. So accept that you will be worried at the moment.
I think that's very good advice, actually. I think, I always think about around exam times, for instance, you get that anxiety, but actually it drives you to action sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think following on from your comment about embrace the anxiety, don't let it overwhelm, but work with it, is also about paying attention to your own physical health, isn't it? And this is a time when there's a lot of uncertainty, but what we do know is if you sleep well, if you take exercise, if you eat healthily, you are much better, you're more resilient physically as well as mentally to fight off some of the effects of the virus should you be exposed. I think some of the problem that we face is just the sheer amount of information that we're getting, both from really trusted sources such as the WHO or International SOS, but also from social media and other such sources. So we were talking this morning about the false news about how you can protect yourself or what might be a cure-all. And I think getting all that information can be quite overwhelming. So one of the points about that is to maybe have a single trusted source of information. If something seems a bit simplistic or slightly strange, check it over with a colleague or somebody else that you know is actually aware and an expert in that arena, because one of the really important things is responding appropriately to the real risks, not responding inappropriately because information or advice out there might be wrong.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that kind of ties into my second point, which is about control. So often when we're faced with a threat such as this, or a perceived threat, then we perceive that threat to be uncontrollable. So that feeling of I can't do anything about it, it's just going to happen to me. And if we perceive something as uncontrollable, firstly it becomes overwhelming, but secondly it stops us doing anything positive about it. And so what's really important at the moment is to think about what you can control with regards to COVID-19. So yes, we can't control the fact that it is spreading in the UK. We can't control the fact it is a pandemic, but we can control, for instance, the amount we are likely to spread it, or our contact, so therefore taking our health promoting behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
As Katie said, we can control it by making sure we're in as best shape physically as we can, and we can also control it by thinking about your behaviour. So one of the other things that happens, if we see things aren't in control, we lose that ability to think creatively or be flexible in problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And actually we can control the way that we are doing things. So that you might be experiencing, some of you are starting to work remotely, but others of you are probably experiencing that you're still having to go to work. So is there something different that you can do at the moment to reduce your risk? So for instance, I have to go to work on some days and I commute on a very busy commuter train in the tube. And so what I've done is change my commuting hours. So rather than going on the train at 8, I'm going to go on the train at 6, which means I won't be on such a busy train, and then I'll return before the rush hour. And so there might be trying to think about things that you can influence at the moment, rather than focusing on the things you can't and worrying about the things you can't control.
Yeah.
I think the second thing I'd say is focus on prevention, not avoidance. So when we're faced again with threats, we enlist all these different coping mechanisms, and there are generally 3 of these coping mechanisms that we use. One of them is something called wishful thinking, which is this feeling of, well, there's nothing I can do, it's not going to happen to me, it's all going to go away and we'll all be all right. Or I'm young, I'm fit, I'm able, it's going to be okay. The problem with that type of coping mechanism, it's very self-related. And so what that means is people who display that are much more likely to avoid people, because it's about looking after themselves, and also been shown to be less likely to take health promoting behaviours, so less likely to wash their hands, for instance. The other type of coping mechanism is called empathetic responding, and that's where we think about the impact of ourselves on other people, and also think about how other people are responding at the moment. And so that's a much better way to think about protecting ourselves and protecting other people. So try to think about how it might feel for other people. So for instance, if you work with people or see people that have family in China or family in India, in Italy at the moment, think about the way that they might be feeling, the fears that they have, and therefore being fearful of them, you being fearful of them is only going to add to their fear and make the situation worse. So to again try and be empathetic, focus on your preventative behaviours, not necessarily on just a blanket avoiding people and being frightened of people.
I think, would you also say that is important for those colleagues now who are working from home maybe for the first time, so they're used to coming into a work environment, that's their social structure during the day, that's who they can talk to, that's who they can say, oh, he's driving me mad again. But they lose that then if they're away, so we just need to be a bit more sensitive that their needs might be additional because of the sort of imposed isolation that we're doing for good prevention measures. But actually in itself might then trigger this sense of mental isolation, won't it?
Absolutely. And so just because we can't, if we are going to go into isolation, just because we can't physically be around those people, we have all the technology available to us now to be able to keep in social contact. And you're absolutely right, social contact and the importance of emotional support is key at this time to ensure that we continue feeling connected to others. So leading on from that and leading on from this idea of social connection is thinking more about your impact on others. So thinking about the impact of your behaviour on perhaps your loved ones. So for instance, if you are still travelling for business, how is that affecting your family and friends? Are you causing them undue worry? Is there anything that you could be changing in your behaviour to reduce that? If you are a parent, are you putting your anxiety unnecessarily onto your children? Are you finding that because of your fears for them, you're actually increasing those fears?
Yeah.
And so to just take a moment to think about how you are impacting others and whether there's anything in your behaviour that you can do to support people in a positive way, and increase that positive engagement with people rather than increasing negative engagement with people.
I think that's a really good point, especially as people are going to be isolated, potentially waiting for testing and then waiting for results. On a personal level, my daughter's boyfriend came back from Italy with symptoms, and I banned him from our house, in that very helpful parent way. But what I used the opportunity to do was to teach my daughter how to communicate over the phone and using FaceTime so that they weren't separated totally, but not just reliant on that physical spacing. And I think it is, isn't it? It's about how do we think about our behaviour on others, and how can we help ourselves and them to modify those behaviours so it's mutually supportive rather than perhaps potentially destructive.
And my last point would be about trying to focus on the present moment. So we're surrounded by what ifs, and Katie talking about the information at the beginning. The information is often about what will happen in the future, what's going to happen in a week, what's going to happen in 10 days, what will happen in September, and so on and so on. And this goes back to my point about controllability, is that we can't control lots of those things that are going to happen in the future. And so therefore, if we focus on that, then again it feels overwhelming, and it's likely to make our psychological response much more heightened and more negative. So try and focus just on what you need to do today. Take every day as it comes. Everything's changing so quickly that it's really important to focus on today. And that might be with work, so thinking about what tasks you've got to do today. So breaking your work day into slots so that you maintain focus on just that moment. Or we might want to use different psychological techniques for that. So using a technique such as meditation or mindfulness could be really helpful, just to make ourselves try and stay in today, in the present moment, rather than spiralling about what might happen.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you very much. So I think what we're trying to say is that although the pandemic itself you have no control over, there are elements in your day, in your life, in your community, in your environment that you do actually have a lot of control over. And it might be that actually what you say is, no, I am not going to travel. I don't want to put myself in that risk, or I have somebody vulnerable at home. I don't want to take on risks that I can't quantify for myself. So I think another one of those key issues is to think about it and have a good reason, but know that no to travel is always going to be a safe option given the current situation.
And to prioritise your health.
Yes.
That we always need to make sure that our job is important, but our health and the health of others has got to be the priority, hasn't it?
And then I think the final bit about all of this, that there are things you can do to improve your resilience, physical and mental. You have got some control over your environment for this, but ultimately you're not alone. And so the final comment is, don't be afraid to reach for help, whether that's to speak to your HR about your flexible working, about where you're working, whether it's because actually despite all of this you're finding the stress and anxiety is starting to be overwhelming and impact on your life. And then you might need some further psychological support, and that is again totally normal. We all respond to stress differently, and it depends when this whole pandemic has impacted on your life and what your other life issues are. So finally, don't be afraid to ask for some help. I would very much like to thank you, Rachel, for coming. It's been really great to talk these through, and I think it's sort of debunked a little bit of the anxiety about anxiety. Actually, as you say, it's normal, it's part of how we respond, but there are things we can do. I would also then like to say to people who are watching this, if you need any more information on COVID-19, please check the website. If you are anxious or you feel that you need some support or your organisation wants to reach out, we actually work with other organisations such as WPO, which is Workplace Options, to look at how we can manage and help to support you get through this period, minimising the impact of mental health issues. Thank you.